Hey, this is Joe. In this video, I'm going to show you how to change the transmission fluid and transmission filter on an automatic transmission in a 2014 Rav4 with a 2.5 liter engine. What you first want to do is jack up the car and safely put it on jack stands. You don't want to crawl underneath the car with just the jack. Then what you want to do before that is go over to Walmart and order yourself the gasket set and the filter. On Walmart it only took a couple days to arrive and it was only $35, so it was very reasonable to pick up the filter and the gasket set for the 2014 Rav4. Looking underneath the car, as you're facing the front of the car in the engine compartment area, on the left hand side is your oil pan. If you look to the right of the exhaust manifold here, you'll see on the right hand side there's another cover, and that's the transmission cover. And on the very bottom you'll see a drain plug, and that drain plug is an H6 Hex Allen head socket. So you can pick these up at your local big box hardware stores, Harbor Freight. You can pick these up in Husky at Home Depot, or you can pick up the Cobalt at Lowe's, or you can go to Harbor Freight and pick yourself a setup of the metric Allen hex head sockets. Let me show you how we're going to loosen that. Get yourself a drain pan right here. Put it underneath that. Now there is inside the oil pan there is a little standoff, and once you drain that fluid from the drain plug, there's still going to be fluid in the pan because they have a standoff that keeps the fluid up above a particular level. So what you're going to have to do is then slowly loosen all of the bolts on the transmission fluid pan, and then slowly let that down. Leave a couple bolts on the front side, so as you loosen the others, the fluid will gently drain out of that pan. Otherwise you're going to make a big mess. So let's go ahead and drain the fluid from the transmission fluid drain, and then we'll start loosening the bolts on the transmission pan. In draining the transmission fluid pan, if you make a mess, just go up to your local store and pick up a bag of kitty litter. That does a really good job of absorbing all of fluids that may fall out of your pan and onto your driveway. Works really well, much cheaper than dedicated oil dripping cleaner. So just go buy a bag of kitty litter. Once you get your oil drain pan situated and get yourself a good stationary flashlight so you can see what you're doing, go ahead and put your H6 hex head socket in there on a 3/8 inch ratchet, and then you can loosen that plug. It shouldn't be too terribly tight. If it is, then just get yourself a extension, a piece of pipe to put on your ratchet, and that should give you enough leverage to loosen that drain plug. Let's go ahead, and now there's a trick to pulling drain plugs. Try not to let it fall in the pan. Bring it down with your fingers until it just starts to come loose. Hold it up against the pan and then gently pull that plug out and let it drain. Now it's going to take a while to drain. If you look at the fluid, it looks pretty dark, so that means it hasn't been changed in a little while. I normally have Toyota do the service on my vehicle, but now that the warranty has expired, I'm going to start doing all the service on my vehicles. Makes it a lot cheaper, and nowadays service and parts have become very expensive, so it makes a lot of sense to do your own maintenance on your vehicles. So let's go ahead and let this drain. I'm not going to let this drain on camera, just a waste of time. So I'll come back after the drain is the fluid has been totally drained, and then we'll start loosening the transmission fluid pan, pulling the bolts down and draining the rest of the fluid. What we want to start doing now is loosening all the bolts around the drain pan. You want to leave one or two on the forward end just snug. You want to remove all the backwards, because what we want to do is gently drop that pan down to drain all the fluid out. The simplest way to do this, if you have an impact driver, just lightly break it loose and then you can loosen all the screws. If you don't have an impact driver, just use a regular 3/8 inch ratchet and short extension and a 10mm socket, and you'll do just fine. Let's go ahead and remove all the bolts except the couple here in the front. Go up to Harbor Freight, get yourself a little magnetic tray. That way you can put all your bolts in there and not lose them. Let's go ahead and put the drain plug in there as well. That way we can keep track of all of our bolts that we pull out of the drain pan. Just pop the bolts out. And if you can't see the bolts, just reach around with your fingers and feel for them. As you'll notice, as we're removing the bolts from the back side, the transmission fluid is now starting to drain out of the back of the pan. And again, we want this to occur. We want to pull all the bolts out except the front ones on here. That way we can control how much fluid we want to drain at a particular time. Now we have all the bolts out with the exception of these. And now I'm going to start removing these gently, and notice now as I loosen the one, now the fluid really starts to flow out. So again, we want to do this so we can capture all of the fluid without making a big mess on our driveway. So go ahead and let the fluid drain, and then we don't want to remove these screws. We want to gently loosen them till the pan starts to angle down. But we won't do that till all of the fluid has finished draining out of the back of the pan here. I'm going to go pick up some paper towels here so we can clean up any mess that we may make. Now the fluid has stopped draining from the rear of the pan. Now let's go ahead and loosen some of these screws a bit more. And as you see, we start to loosen. We get, and there's a big dump of fluid. And again, we want to just do this slowly so we drain all the fluid out. What we're going to do eventually, we're going to put our hand up there and start removing some of these bolts. And then we'll slowly remove the pan down. There'll probably be still a little bit of fluid left in the pan, but it will be much more manageable than trying to drop down a pan full of fluid. What I'll do now is just use the 10mm and my fingers to slowly loosen the bolts. Look like we almost have all of the fluid out of the pan now. We can now hold the pan up a little bit more. looks pretty good. Now I'm going to start removing all but maybe one or two of the bolts. And I'm holding my hand up onto the pan. And let's go ahead and gently let this pan down. It looks like we got almost all of it. So let's go ahead, hold the pan up, and loosen the last two screws, or bolts. Now we only have one bolt, and looks like the pan is pretty empty. So what I'm going to do now is remove the last bolt, and I'm holding again the pan with my hand. Okay, we got all of the bolts out. Now I'm going to gently let down the pan, and as you can see, there's just a tiny bit of fluid. Actually, this is pretty good. This is the first time I've done this without making a total mess of my driveway. So let's go ahead and wipe the valve body off. Be gentle not to disrupt any of your wires on the valve body, but let's go ahead and clean that up. Also, take a paper towel and wipe around the surface here. You notice the gasket, which is the black portion, is in place. Now what we're going to do is gently pull that old gasket out. Actually, it's in not too terribly bad of a condition, but it's always a good idea to replace these gaskets every time you drop a pan. So let's go ahead and put this off to the side. And again, get yourself a paper towel, and we're going to go around and we're going to really carefully wipe the mating surfaces of the transmission where the gasket sits on the transmission, and then the pan sits on that gasket. Now that we have that out, here is your filter right here, and you notice there's a couple of 10mm bolts here. We're going to pop these bolts, change this filter, then we're going to get ourselves some brake clean and a clean paper towel, and we're going to clean the surface really well on the mating surface of the transmission and where the pan goes. And we're going to take this pan over and put it in another pan, and we're going to wash it really well with kerosene. If we need to take a little razor blade to clean the surface of the pan, we can do that, but we want to get both mating surfaces really clean. We don't want any leaks to occur when we put the new gasket, put the pan back on to the transmission. What you're going to need now is a little bit of kerosene. You can pick this up at big box stores, and some gas stations sell kerosene. If you don't have kerosene, pick yourself up a gallon of diesel fuel. Get yourself a open oil drain pan. You can pick these up either at Harbor Freight or Walmart. Get yourself a 1-inch cleaning brush. Again, Harbor Freight sells these really cheaply. Take and drain your oil pan into your drain pan, and then put that into your drip pan or your oil drain pan. And then let's go ahead, pour a little kerosene in there. And what we're going to do now is take our parts brush, and we're going to clean the whole inside of the pan out. Make sure you wash really well the mating surfaces of this pan with the kerosene. And then when we're done washing, we're going to go through, wipe it down really well. And if there's any gasket material that is stuck to this mating surface, you can either pick up a regular razor blade, or I like to use the plastic razor blades. You can get those on Amazon. And you can then clean off the mating surfaces. You can also get up on the transmission side of the mating surface and wipe that down really well with brake clean. We're going to wipe this down really well with brake clean. Get any crud that is left over from the old gasket, or if someone has taken and used a gasket maker material, you want to scrape all that off. You want two really clean surfaces for this gasket to mate to, otherwise you're going to have leaks, and you don't want any leaks because then you have to drop the pan again. So let's clean this really well. Here's that little standoff I was telling you about. They purposely put that in the pan so it won't pick up any crud off the bottom of the pan. Sometimes your transmission will start to disintegrate itself or have metal particles in the bottom. And this standoff is to prevent any of those metal particles from being picked up by the pump in the transmission and causing further damage. So you want to make sure this can be removed, but you want to make sure this stays in place. Clean that really well. Get all the old transmission fluid out. Clean all your mating surfaces. Looks pretty good now. Let's go ahead and pour the kerosene or diesel fuel out of the pan. And let's put this off to the side now. Let's get some paper towels and we're going to clean this pan really well. And notice there's a little piece of magnet in the bottom there. Sometimes they will put little pieces of magnet. Notice there's another one here. They put that in the bottom to collect little particles of metal that may drop out of the transmission, and it will then stick to those magnets and not be picked up by the sump pump and run through the transmission again. So for the time being, let's take these little magnets out, put them off to the side, but let's remember when we put this pan back in to put those magnets back in the bottom of the pan. Let's go ahead and get a clean paper towel now that we've got all the majority of the kerosene out of the way. And let's wipe this down really clean. And what we want to do is inspect the mating surface of this pan and make sure, run your finger along there, make sure there's no particles or old stuck gasket material to this mating surface. The pan is now really clean. Now let's go get some brake clean and we will spray it around the outside of the mating surface of the pan to make sure it's really clean. We have the brake clean. Nice thing about brake clean is it really a strong cleaner, but it has the nice feature of evaporating really quickly, so it doesn't leave any residue. So we want to spray the surfaces, the mating surfaces, and we want to get our paper towels and we want to wipe it before it evaporates. And if there's a little residual on the inside of the pan, take and wipe that up, and then wipe your seal again. Look at your paper towel. You notice, spray it again and wipe it. And what we're looking for after you wipe it, you want very little residue on your paper towel, which means we're getting all of the dirt and crud off that mating surface. So that's what you're looking for. Run your finger on there and feel for any particles, old gasket material is on there. If there is, get yourself a little razor blade, either plastic or metal, and scrape that off. And then hit it with brake clean again to make sure it's totally clean. what we can do now is get our gasket and filter kit that we picked up from Walmart. Be very careful with this gasket. It's a cork material. It will tear very easily. What you want to do is take that gasket and lay it on the pan. And as you can see, take and line the holes. Of that. Notice it's not fitting, and the reason it's not fitting is because I have it upside down. So you want to make sure, notice the pan tapers in here and it's straight here. So make sure you get the gasket on properly on the pan. Like so, and it will flop around on you. When we get ready to put it in the vehicle, we'll take and we'll put a screw or two on there to keep this aligned. Notice now, check all the holes, make sure all the holes are aligned with the holes in the pan to the holes in the gasket. Now what we can do is set this off to the side, because now we're going to change the filter. We're going to clean the mating surface on the transmission, and then we're going to start bolting the pan back onto the transmission, leaving the gasket on the pan because it makes it easier to put in place. If you try to hold it up against the transmission, it's going to be near impossible because you'll keep on falling. So now let's get back underneath the car and unbolt the transmission filter, and let's put the new filter on. Now if we look at the new transmission filter, notice there's only two bolt holes. There's one here and there's one here. So when we get underneath the vehicle, we want to make sure we only remove the same two bolt holes on the original filter, so that when we put the new filter back in, we won't be loosening or removing any bolts on the valve body. We only want to loosen and remove the two bolts for the transmission filter. Now if you turn this filter over, you notice there's a hole here and there's an O-ring right here. We want to get a little transmission fluid and we want to lubricate that O-ring so that when we stick the filter back up into the transmission, it's well lubricated. We don't want to run the risk of cutting that O-ring. And the oil transmission fluid on that O-ring lubricates and protects that O-ring and makes a good seal when we put this new filter back in up on the transmission. Now looking at the new filter, put it in place, we can now see that there is a bolt here and there's a bolt here. So let's go ahead, and I like to use just the manual 3/8" ratchet. There's only two bolts and this makes it easy to see what you're doing. Let's go ahead now and pull the other bolt, and as you can see, we're draining some more fluid from the filter. Now what we want to do, we want to get our brake clean, and we want to spray the mating surface and the filter area really well. And now what we can do is take and wipe all the mating surfaces on the transmission side to make sure there's no crud or old gasket material on this mating surface. We want it totally clean and no dirt or grease or anything on there. So take your paper towel, run it along the mating surface, and then take your finger and run it and make sure there's no crud on any of those mating surfaces. run your paper towel in around where that O-ring seats, because we don't want any crud where the new O-ring gets up in and makes a connection up into the valve body here. And again, we want to get a dry paper towel and we want to run it along the mating surfaces, checking that we got all of the grease and grime and old gasket material off those mating surfaces. And as you see, we have a pretty clean paper towel now. So what we want to do now is take the new filter, and I'm wiping it down because I spilled a little bit of the old fluid on it. Now take your finger and dip it into some of the transmission fluid from your drain pan, and you want to rub it on that O-ring to lubricate that up really well. If you want to use new transmission fluid, that's good too. So now what we want to do is again clean the O-ring surface. And then we want to push that up and get one of our bolts. And I like to take and finger tight these bolts. And then we can take the other bolt and run that up into there as well. And now we can tighten that oil filter in place. You don't want to over tighten it. You just want to make sure it's good and snug. Let's clean up the filter area here. Make sure your O-ring is seated properly. And now we're ready to take and put the pan with the new gasket back up in place. Right before we put the drain pan back on, we want to put our magnets back in the pan, space them out. We want to get ourselves some automobile grade RTV silicone rubber or gasket making material. Make sure it can be used with oil, because this is an oil pan. I have a commercial grade here that I use, but you can go to any auto parts store and pick yourself up some RTV gasket maker. And what I like to do is just put a couple of dabs in each of the corner. The cork gasket will provide the sealing. What the gasket maker does is it holds this gasket in place. One thing you don't want to happen is have this gasket shift when you're screwing the bolts through the gaskets and up into the transmission. If this gasket slides or shifts and you miss a hole, your pan is going to leak fluid, and we don't want that. So what I do is I put a little bit of the RTV on the gasket just to hold it in place while I'm fitting the pan up to the transmission and putting the bolts in. We're going to start it with 1 or 2 bolts to make sure it's up onto the transmission, and then that way it'll be much easier to fit the other bolts in through the holes. So let's go ahead and put a dab in each corner to hold the gasket in place. Again, not a lot. We're just using it to hold the gasket in place. And then make sure when you put the gasket on the pan, push down, and you want to make sure that all of the holes in the gasket align to all of the holes in the pan. This way the gasket is held in place, and you don't run the risk of misaligning the gasket when we go to mount it to the transmission surface. Let's go ahead, get underneath the vehicle, and we'll start a couple of bolts into the gasket pan to hold it in place, so that will give us a much easier time at putting the rest of the bolts into the pan. What we want to do now is gently pick up the pan without messing with the alignment of the holes in the gasket. Get ourselves 1 or 2 bolts and very gently put the pan in place and align the holes. You may have to gently reposition the gasket. The first one is the hardest. Get that pan up there, and then space your bolts around a bit. So we have 2 in the front. So now we want to snug those up just a bit. And then we want to get ourselves another bolt or 2 into the rear. I like to space them out on each side. That way we know once you get 3 or 4 bolts in, you know that your gasket is going to be aligned all the way around. And again, I like to put these in finger tight first. You don't want to cross thread any bolts into the pan up into the transmission. Okay, once you get the pan snug, then you want to go all the way around and visually make sure that that gasket is there, and you can see it or feel it with your fingers. Now what we can do is we can take the rest of the bolts, and again I like to hand start them all before I tighten them up, because last thing you want to do is cross thread the bolts into that pan, and that's going to ruin your day. And I like to space the bolt pattern out so that I just don't want to work on one corner. I want to space the bolts out evenly as I put them in. It makes the bolts easier to seat in, and it also ensures that your pan is in the proper position by making sure you space out the bolts around the pan. Okay, we have all of the bolts into the pan. You want to take and run your fingers around to make sure they're all snug and you haven't missed any holes, just to make sure you didn't drop a bolt and lose it. So I'm running my fingers all the way around, and there's no missing bolts. So we have the pan on. Now what we want to do is just snug up the bolts. We don't want to tighten them, we just want to snug them, because we're going to use a torque wrench to do the final torquing on these bolts. So we just want to snug them up. We don't want to tighten them. So all of the bolts have now been snugged all the way around. Now what we want to do is, before we torque those bolts down, we want to get our drain plug, and we want to put our drain plug back in. And what we have is the little plastic tube inside is not all the way seated. Okay, it's actually not a screwdriver, it's our H6, and all we want to do is take and tighten that till it's snug. Then we want to get our drain plug, and we want to then get our ratchet, and we want to snug our drain plug in. Now what we can do, let's go get the torque wrench, look up the torque specifications for the bolts and the drain plug, and then we'll tighten those with the torque wrench. The torque on the bolts are 5.5 foot-pounds, and the torque on the drain plug is 5.5 foot-pounds. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a torque wrench. I'm using a Quinn torque adapter, which is a nice little small adapter. So what we'll do is we'll set that up, and what you want to torque is in a crisscross pattern. Okay, 5.5, and then we're going to work our way around in a cross pattern. Now all we have to do is take and torque the drain plug. Again, that is 5.5. And we are now all torqued. The drain plug is torqued. The hard part is done now. All we have to do is, there's a cover up on the driver's side here in the fender well, and there's a plug in there, and that's how we fill the transmission fluid. It's supposed to take 6.6 quarts, so we're going to pull that cover, and I have a hose with a funnel, and we're going to put in 6.6 quarts, and then we'll be done with the servicing. In the left driver's side wheel well, there's a couple of click-in fasteners, so let's just go ahead and pop those out. And this wheel well cover should pop out. And once you pop that out, notice there's a fill plug right here. This is, you unloosen that fill plug, and we'll get our funnel and our hose, and we can then fill in 6.6 quarts of transmission. You want Dextron Mercon transmission fluid to go into there. And let's go ahead and get that and find out what size bolt or plug that is. We'll pull that out, and then we'll proceed to fill the transmission fluid. And we have a 24mm half-inch drive socket, and we're going to use a little bit of pipe on here as an extension to help with the leverage. So let's go ahead and pop that drain plug loose, or that fill plug loose. Okay, we have the fill plug out. Let's go ahead and get our funnel and our hosing, and let's go ahead and pump some transmission fluid in there. Okay, so I won't make a total mess all over my driveway. I have an old oil container, and the fitting that I purchased fits on either a 90 weight container or a quart oil container. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill this bottle at a quart at a time and feed it in to the transmission, and that way we won't make a total mess. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this and do it off camera, because switching that hose up really high is going to be a pain to film. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the 4, and then we'll come back and measure out the other section from the other gallon container and fill that in as well, and we'll come back when the transmission has 6.6 quarts of oil installed in the transmission. We put 6 quarts and about 700 milliliters in, just in case there was any leakage from the container. So that should give us 6.6 quarts. And we put the fill plug back in. We put the inner plastic fender piece in. Let's lower it down off the jack, take it for a drive and see how it runs, and then we'll wrap up this video. We took the car out for a drive. We went through all the gears. We also ran it in reverse for a while to make sure that we circulated the transmission fluid properly through the transmission. We warmed it up a bit. Everything is running fine, so hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.